dear all, thank you for being here. I'm Evagorou, Communication Officer at the DEMOTEC EU project and International Affairs at the Cyprus University of Technology. I will be facilitating today's panel with the subject of participatory budgeting, participation, and the media. Before we start, I just want to pose statistically a question. How many of you have heard already about participatory budget? Just raise your hands. Oh, it's a good thing that we have in the audience. One third of the audience. It's a good starting point, yeah. So our purpose in this panel is just to have an open discussion. Of course, we will have some initial remarks from our panelists, and then please feel free to share your thoughts, your comments, and some questions at the end, hopefully. We have a short period of time. The way we are thinking of doing this is I will introduce the panelists, and then they will have a round of opening statements and then an open discussion. Okay, first of all, I transfer the apologies of Leah Spyridou, who didn't make it today. She's the assistant professor at the Cyprus University of Technology, and she's actually the coordinator of the DEMOTEC program that we are presenting today. I will introduce first Bogdan, Mihai, Radu. Welcome. He's a political scientist and senior lecturer in political science at Babeș-Bolyai University, in Cluj-Napoca, Romania. He holds a PhD degree from the University of California, Irvine, and a master's degree from the University of Manchester. His research focuses on exploring the formation of political values and patterns of political participation in post-communist countries. We also have with us Vasilis Manavopoulos from Thessaloniki. He is currently project manager for the DEMOTEC project, funded by the European Horizon 2020 scheme. His main research interests include quantitative research methods and statistics, political psychology, and social network analysis. Fernando Mendez. He's a political scientist and a senior researcher at the Center for Democracy Studies, ARU, is that correct? And Department of Law at the University of Zurich, where he works in the area of direct democracy. And final but not least, Nikandros. He's a PhD candidate at Pompeu Fabra University and research associate at Cyprus University of Technology at DEMOTEC program. Okay, I think we're ready to start with our presentations. Vasilis, can you please start with an introducing of the program and of participatory budgeting?
Sure. Do we need the microphones? This small crowd? That's all. Okay. So presumably you can hear me better now. So quite a number of you have heard of participatory budgeting, and can I ask, do you like the idea? Do you think it's a good idea, participatory budgeting? Yes? Well, I started the same way as you did, but changed my mind a bit in the process. But first of all, let me thank you for your interest in this panel, since it allows us to showcase the results of a research project called DEMOTEC, which we've been all working for the past 2.5 years or so. This project is one of those largish EU-funded research projects that get money under the Horizon umbrella, the Horizon program. So there's a lot of people involved. So there's quite a large number of people involved, 7 teams from 6 different countries. The duration is large, 3 years, and every single speaker who you're seeing in front of you has been working for this project since March 2021 and will be finishing up in this upcoming February. So what's this project about? The main impetus behind this project is the investigation of the viability and the potential outcomes of applying something called participatory budgeting. So for those of you who have never heard of this, participatory budgeting is one of those democratic innovations, is one of those alternative ways of doing democracy that aim at engaging citizens, making them a bit more active, connecting them to the policy-making process. And participatory budgeting in specific is a scheme whereby citizens decide directly or are consulted about portions of a public budget. So, say for example, the mayor of Nicosia decides one day that he'll take 0.5% of the municipal budget, and the way that this money is going to be spent is going to be directly decided by citizens. So that's the general idea, and this is not a theoretical concept or some abstract principle. It's something that has been applied, it has been tried since the 1990s. It's going on in about 1,700 cities across the world, mostly in Latin America. When it comes to Europe, it's a bit more rare, so you'll find about 200 to 250 cities having adopted it, most notably Madrid and Paris. It has even been tried in Cyprus twice by the municipalities of Agia Napa and Paphos. So this is a sort of a real policy-making tool that people have been trying. Given that our objective is to investigate this participatory budgeting, the first question that we tried answering is this something that citizens actually want to see implemented in their own cities? And in order to do that, we conducted a large survey with representative samples of the populations, on which our colleague from Romania is going to be expanding upon in a couple of minutes. So the first question we want to ask, is this something that citizens want to see taking place? Now, in a lot of cases, in a lot of countries that the survey was run, this was a practical question. Say in Poland, it's constitutionally mandated that cities over 200,000 people have to do participatory budgeting for a portion of their budget. Now, in other cases like Cyprus or Greece, this is more of a theoretical question. Does this sound like a good idea? So another thing that we wanted to do through the project was to actually test different forms of participatory budgeting on the ground in 7 countries that we've been running this project in. And different forms, because participatory budgeting is a very malleable, it's a very flexible policy-making tool. So in some cities, what they do is the city council has 10 infrastructure projects under consideration, and they don't have the budget to do all of them. So what do? They ask citizens to vote what should be done first. In other cities, what they do is a bit of the reverse. That is to say, they ask citizens, what would be a good idea to spend 100,000 euros on? So people are free to propose their own projects. And then the council decides what they're actually going to implement. In some cases, they do this. Both of these things at the same time, and in yet other cities, they do a a much more complicated process that involves multiple stages and an annual cycle that essentially begins immediately after the previous year's participatory budgeting cycle ends. So we wanted to test different forms of participatory budgeting on the ground and see what works in each country and what doesn't. The final two, I'll be expanding a bit upon later. The final two things that the final two speakers are going to be discussing the relationship between participatory budgeting and the media, because, okay, we live in the world of social media, but at least we think that traditional mass media still carry the power to determine the agenda or to drive discussion one way or the other. And of course, they are also an important factor in determining the success of any kind of citizen engagement scheme. So this is what we've been doing for the past 2.5 years. And the last 6 months of the project, what we are going to be trying to do is have 7 cities who are partners in the project actually implement participatory budgeting in reality. So I'll pass the microphone on to Dr. Radu, who will be discussing the sort of, is this something that people want to see happen?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for surviving up to this hour. I will not be very long. I was in charge, or I was part of the team that worked on the survey. We conducted a survey in 10 countries, like Vasilis said. I'll give you a little bit of a context. You don't need much context because everybody before us talked about how political participation is going down, how there are many people which are, not interested in politics any longer, how the youth are a special case, and so on and so forth. So we kind of started off from this democratic malaise kind of thesis, which is not just a thesis, it's reality. There is a plethora of writing here. I'll have to talk a little bit about two pieces of research. One of them, they're both by these guys called Foa and Monk. One of them is about how people are becoming dissatisfied in traditional democracies with their own political systems, and while at the beginning there was the hope that people are just dissatisfied with particular governments, it turns out they are not dissatisfied with governments, they are dissatisfied with even with the idea to some extent, which then obviously can become very dangerous because it's, it's easier to kind of get closer to authoritarianism. The other piece is it looks at how young people relate themselves to democratic politics, and it shows that, again, in consolidated democracies like Western Europe, the US, younger people have a tendency to like populist parties, both to the left and to the right. I'm not here to say that liking populist parties is necessarily bad, although I do think it's bad, but it is a threat to liberal democracy. So then, in this context of democratic malaise, we thought that participatory budgeting and other types of democratic innovations like referenda or citizens' juries, assemblies, those things can, to some extent, remedy this issue. It's obvious that representative democracy for some people is failing. It's not enough. It's not interesting any longer. But those types of participatory acts, they involve more ownership. You feel that you're actually deciding something. So hence, we look at participatory budgeting. If I could please have my slide on now. All right, just this one graph there. You see it, there were 3 questions. The first column is awareness of PB, so the percentage of people that are aware of participatory budgeting. Then the tiny numbers are the ones that look at people that participated already in participatory budgeting, and it's gone. When it was becoming more optimistic. Can we see it again, perhaps? Yeah? And then the last column is people that are interested to participate in participatory budgeting. So of course we see a lot of variety in terms of awareness, and like Vasilis said, Poland has this constitutionally mandated situation, which means that everybody heard about it. It also means that more people were involved in it. But then you do see a lot of diversity. Cyprus, Romania, which is my own country, but then Ireland are somewhat low on these numbers. But what's to take home from this particular graph is that whether they participated or not, there is some interest in it, in all these countries. And as you can tell, it's Romania, UK, Cyprus, Germany, Poland, Netherlands, Spain, France, Greece, and Ireland. So it's a very diverse set of countries. So then we looked at what predicts support for participatory budgeting. So those people that did participate, who are they? What kind of people they are? And then what we found is that they are people that in general, they have a higher stock of institutional and social trust. What that means is that they trust political institutions more. So trusting the parliament, trusting the government would make you more appreciative of participatory budgeting, which makes sense. What is also interesting is that those people are also higher on social trust. Social trust is trust we have towards other people. So then societies where social trust is higher, and there is a huge literature here, you probably know it, a lot of Scandinavian countries, claiming that they are the most trustworthy, and well, perhaps they are. But living in societies that have a lot of interpersonal trust makes one participate more. Also, we see that people that volunteer more, so people that are civically engaged, they're also more prone to participate. Voting, so all kinds of conventional participation, voting in national or local elections makes one also want to participate in participatory budgeting. Those people that have higher interest in politics, they'll obviously participate more. And then also education is positively correlated, so the higher the education, the more the appreciation. Then of course we also found some more puzzling stuff like age. The effect of age was mixed from country to country. In some countries, young people were more appreciative of participatory budgeting, which makes sense because they're all about newer types of participation. While in other countries it wasn't like that. So then we also looked at particular features of participatory budgeting that are appreciated by people, that people value. And like Vasilis said, there are different ways of doing participatory budgeting. You can do it in very different ways. We found out that in all these countries, what really matters the most is that the decisions made in participatory budgeting are binding. So you don't just organize a whole process and then the local government says, oh, yeah, we'll eventually do something about it. Those decisions need to be binding. So people need to see that whatever they voted on or they decided upon gets implemented. We also found out that people would like for participatory budgeting to kind of be open to everybody. In some cities, like in my city, there are sometimes priorities that the city hall would impose or suggest. They say, oh, we'll find projects on, I don't know, environment or kindergartens. But people really like that everybody should be able to express all kind of projects. Interestingly, if PB is online or offline doesn't seem to make a difference. So we had this idea that, and the literature had this idea that, if it's an offline situation, people start talking and then they properly deliberate, and that would make them want to participate more. It doesn't seem to make a difference. Also, whether the city hall is involved in organizing consultations with citizens, that also doesn't make a difference. And then finally, we did find a worrying puzzle, and I couldn't stop myself from leaving this presentation on a pessimistic note. We found that in some countries, support for participatory budgeting is correlated with a preference for authoritarian politics. And that was mostly in, let's say, Western, more consolidated democracies. And then the puzzle is this one. On the one hand, if people are not happy with how democracy works, participatory budgeting can be one solution to remedy it. People will start trusting the system, they will participate, and then eventually things may work better. But there is also another side of potentially the same coin, which is that people that are fully dissatisfied with the functioning of the system are getting mobilized by anti-democratic forces. Like we know populists, for example, love referenda. And then they get mobilized, perhaps not for the right reasons, and they end up participating, but this does not improve quality of democracy. It's all a matter of how this political mobilization happens. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah, Vasilis, you can continue.
Yeah, so as I said, I'm coming back, and essentially what I'll be describing to you is a number of experiments we run. As I said, many different ways to do participatory budgeting, and we wanted to test a number of them in each country to see, okay, does this work here? Is this important or is this not? Is this something that people are happy with? So we wanted to actually give people a simulated experience, because there is no public money being given through this process. We wanted to give people an experience of what a participatory budgeting process would look like, and then see, okay, are they happy with it or are they not? How does one do this? We found 120 to 200 volunteers in each country. We split them into 3 groups, and each group experienced a different form of participatory budgeting. What were these actual forms? One of the groups, Group A, had to meet 3 times in 3 consecutive weeks for 2 hours each time. Now, this group during the first meeting, they decided, okay, what are the city's needs? They had a discussion between themselves, and they said, okay, these are the needs, these are the priorities, and this is the order in which we'll try to address them. During the second meeting, they took these priorities that they had determined the previous time, and they had to formulate actual projects, real things that could be done to address these needs. And during the third meeting, they received a list of 6 candidate PB projects, some of which they had articulated during the previous meeting, and they had to vote on which of these 6 they preferred first and which they preferred last. Group B, on the other hand, only took part in the last section of this process, meaning Group B met once for 2 hours, and they received a predetermined list, predetermined not by them, a predetermined list of 6 candidate projects, installing solar panels on streetlights, or having accessibility ramps on all pavements, this kind of thing. And they had to choose among the 6, they had to vote among the 6. And then there was a third group that never met. It was participation through an online platform where people just visited a website, read instructions, and then voted on the 6, on the list of 6 candidate projects. So what were we looking at? We looked at 3 different things. First thing we looked at was personal satisfaction with the process, subjective evaluation of the process. Questions like, I felt I had my voice heard, or I was bored during the process, that kind of question. So we asked these 3 groups after the whole thing was concluded, all these questions, and we formed a composite score, an index from 1 to 10. The second thing we cared about was, if this was to take place in your city, how likely is it that you would actually take part in it? Again, 0 to 10, not at all, to very likely that I would take part. And we had some other questions that evaluated PB as policy. Questions like, PB would lead to bad decisions for the city, or PB cannot work in this, or PB is a good way of making decisions, so that kind of question. An evaluation of PB as policy. Now, we asked these questions both before and after the experiment. So people initially answered only after having received a very brief definition of what participatory budgeting is. They heard, okay, citizens decide parts of a public budget. Okay, how do you evaluate this idea? Do you like this idea? And then they answered the same question after having the experience of it. So I had some graphs to show you results, but I don't think I'm going to tar you with those. I'll go straight to the take-home points, which are three, and in a bit of a conflict with what Dr. Radu told you before. Number one, participants were happy with the experience regardless of the different form of participatory budgeting that they experienced. So online, offline only once, or 6 hours, it didn't matter. People were happy to take part in something like this. Similarly, they declared, I would be very likely to take part in such a thing if it took place in my city. The only thing that differed between the three groups was the final thing, the evaluation of PB as a policy tool. Do you think it's a good idea to do this? And there we found that before and after the experience, all three groups had a higher rating, meaning, okay, they weren't suspicious beforehand, but they weren't as enthusiastic, well, let's say enthusiastic about it, as they were afterwards. So they increased the rating before and after. But the rate of increase was higher for the groups that actually met in person. So the people who met others and discussed, sometimes often strangers, and they just discussed the problems of their city or discussed, what are we going to be doing, they felt that that PB was a better idea than people who just visited the platform and then just checked a box. There's quite a bit more, but if anyone's interested, we can go over them during the question. So I'll pass the microphone on to Fernando Mendez.
Is it on? Hello? It's fine. I think it's on. Thank you, Vasilis. And thank you for coming to this panel and having me here. So I'm going to talk about how the media represent participatory budgeting. We'll use the acronym PB to refer to that. And we're particularly interested in how they write about, how they talk about PB in their news stories, basically how they represent. What aspects of PB do they emphasize or de-emphasize? And this sometimes goes by the name of doing a framing analysis, because a phenomenon, in this case PB, can be framed in various different ways. And why is this important? Well, because people read newspapers and interact in social media as well, and this influences citizens' attitudes towards PB. So that's why it's important to see how the news media is framing a particular topic. We talked about the EU before, and anyone remotely familiar with, say, how Europe and the European Union has been discussed in, say, the UK 2 decades before the Brexit referendum would understand how you can get a referendum outcome like Brexit if the dominant media frame the European Union, in this case, in a negative way. Or take any contemporary issue, climate change or corona, whatever, the coronavirus. So framing is important, and it's important because it helps to shape public opinion and citizens' attitudes. So what we did was we had to collect a corpus, a collection of documents. And we did that for the news media. We did it in 9 languages. The 9 languages that were spoken in the case studies that Vasilis and Bogdan presented. 4 of these were international languages like Spanish, French, Portuguese and English, and others less international like, I don't know, Greek or Dutch, German, Polish, for instance. We created a corpus of about 350,000 documents, and that includes news media articles, about 50,000, and tweets as well, because we also looked at social media, because we wanted to see how people, or Twitter users in this case, were representing and talking about PB. So the scope of the collection was broad. It spanned the globe in terms of the languages spoken. And there were some symmetries. So this is a quick overview of the frequency. I mean, we're talking, what we can see in this graph is not so much the absolute numbers, but it's the increasing trend of news articles on participatory budgeting, PB, and also PB-related tweets. And you can see a dip in both these time series, and that occurred when coronavirus broke out. You see, people stopped talking about it, or less news articles about it. So what did we do? We came up with two dimensions to study this. One dimension is the frame, and to simplify things, we had two basic frames. I'll present these in a moment. One was more about democratic values, and the other one was more sort of utilitarian in scope. It was about resources and how resources are allocated and distributed. On this x-axis in the graph, you can see another dimension, which is the tone and the valence. And this basically refers to whether the frame is positive or negative. So you can talk about the budget, for instance, and you can frame it positively or negatively. There are various ways. Can we go to the next slide? And this gave rise to like a 2x2 matrix with 4 components. So in the values, what we called the values frame, were all these news articles and tweets as well, because how people speak about PB in social media, and how journalists write about PB was not particularly different. They use the same discursive and rhetorical devices. So in the first one was the emphasizing the normative aspects, and specifically the democratic normative aspects of PB. So you'd present PB as a solution, as some aspirational goal, as something you should do, how it empowers. And one of the topics of today was also important, transparency and accountability, how it improves transparency and accountability. And there were also some instances of framing PB in terms of social inclusion, giving voice to minorities. Now, below that box, you see the other dominant frame, which was talking about PB in terms of resources. Quite obvious, because PB is ultimately about reallocation of a budget. It's about spending priorities. It's about what to do with policy. So it's not surprising that there would be this resource frame. Now, what's really interesting, we think, is that these were obviously positive framings of PB, but there was also an antithetical framing which, contradicted this, and this is in the negative side. So in terms of values, you can run the opposite argument. You can run the citizen competence. Why? How can you allow citizens to decide upon something so complicated as allocating a budget? Surely this requires specialist knowledge. And then, of course, there were some frames that focused on how it gets dominated by partisanship and how it can lead to corruption as well. So we found these negative frames. And in terms of discussing resources and budgets and stuff like that, we also found that, of course, you could, well, it's not obvious, but we did find instances of people complaining, or journalists complaining about, there's insufficient money, too little money, it's very bureaucratic, there's lots of delays and waste. So you get these negative frames as well. So that's a quick kind of mapping of the PB panorama in terms of how it's discussed in the media. And what's interesting here is that it was overwhelmingly positive. About 90% of the sample that we analysed was positive. So the negative aspects are quite rare, but they're there. and one would presume they would become more prevalent. And lastly, why is this important? Because, well, this influences how people perceive and think about PB. I'll stop there.
We will continue with Nikandros, who will speak about the journalist perception on participatory budgeting.
Yeah, then carry on from what Fernando was explaining regarding the importance of mass media in the diffusion of PB and generally in for all other types of democratic innovations. Not part of the literature. The literature defines mass media as an essential contributor, an essential facilitator for the diffusion of any innovation. So we argued and we believe that mass media are also essential for the diffusion of PBs. And therefore, what we did, we spoke with mass media practitioners, journalists. We conducted 15 in-depth interviews in 3 European countries, namely Cyprus, the UK, and Romania. The interviews were minimum 40 minutes, at max more than an hour. Then we transcribed the interviews and we coded the interviews, and we coded the interviewees' arguments in different groupings. I visualize some of these groupings, and can you, Vasilis, go to the first? So at first, what we would like to find, so we had 2 main objectives with this part of the study. First, we wanted to identify how willing are journalists to cover PBs and to facilitate the diffusion of PBs. And the next objective is to ask them to identify any possible obstacles in the diffusion and the institutionalization of PBs. So firstly, we discuss with them and ask them, are you willing to cover PBs? How is the idea of PB, the concept of PB, sound to you? Is something that is positive, something that is negative, something that it could contribute positively in the society? And as you can see, the overwhelming majority of our sample interviewees, journalists, they are vastly positive in favor of PB, especially in Cyprus, but the differences are very small. So more than 70% of the interviews' arguments were grouped as being positive towards PB. So next, we asked them to name which are the most important and most significant obstacles that PB may face in its diffusion and institutionalization. So in terms of the citizens, the most dominant topic coming out from interviews is the lack of interest. So almost all interviewees named the lack of interest from the side of citizens as a very crucial and potential obstacle for the diffusion of PB. They told us that people don't have the time, they don't have the free time to participate. They're working 8 hours a day, even more. They're going back home. They have like leisure activities. They want to do something else. They're not going to spend that time in participating in PB and all other democratic innovations. What is interesting is that in Romania and the UK, lack of skills. So many interviews said that citizens don't have the skills to decide. They're not equipped with the necessary knowledge to decide which projects are more substantial and to choose between the best ones. However, this topic was not so predominant in Cyprus, while in Cyprus the second most frequent topic was personal interest. So Cypriot journalists considered that Cypriots, if they will participate in PBs, if they will indeed show up and participate in PBs, they will do because of personal interest. They will vote based on their personal interest, and even some name party groupings and parties sorting. So people they will be motivated by parties, and they will show up in PBs and vote according to their party's will. So next, what we did, we also asked them about their perception of their role towards democracy. So what is the role of journalism towards democracy? Should journalists be active facilitators of social change, or they should be subjective reporters of reality? So the vast majority responded that journalists should be an active facilitator of social change. And a smaller minority said the opposite, that journalists should be very far away from the events, and they should subjectively report the events and cover the events. So what we find is that people who are, journalists who perceive themselves more as active facilitators of social change, they're more likely to support PB as a positive idea. And finally, what we did, we asked them which are the main obstacles from the media field, from their side, from their profession, on PB. So what are the main disadvantages or problems they will face from the media field, from their side, from the side of their profession? And the most dominant topic, again, was the newsworthiness of PB. So what they said, if it's going to be a PB in a small town or a small city, only the very local media will be willing to cover these PBs because it's not newsworthy for national-wide media, and also the level of the budget that is allocated to PB, they consider to be very, very important. So if a small city allocates a very small part of its budget for a PB, then is less newsworthy. If a very big city allocates a big part of its budget for PB procedures, then it's far more newsworthy. So this is also a very apparent issue from the side of journalists. And that's from me.
Thank you all. Yes, we will take questions. I just want to make 1-2 points before we enter the group discussion. It seems from the experiments, both from the experiments with the citizens engaged in those countries and the journalists, that there is let's say in majority, a positive attitude towards participatory budgeting. Personally, I have to admit, when I heard Fernand's, because it's about an innovation, it's about direct democracy, I thought, yes, since I pay taxes, municipal taxes and everything, as a citizen, I want to have a say in policy making and the projects being taken in my city. I want to pose a question, and then we will take your question. A general one, addressing both the panelists and our audience. Do you think, with what you heard, that can it really work? And if we implement it, what will be possible benefits, and what will be the dangers of it in terms of ways of implementation? And you mentioned something, Bogdan, about authoritarian regimes. And I'm wondering how it could work in Cyprus, and I want to hear your thoughts.
Shall we ask the audience?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, I have to say that I work in the parliament, and a big part of my job is actually monitoring what's going on with the budget. So I've had this conversation many times, and it's my personal belief that if it was about a full-scale discussion of the full budget, it would be a huge problem, because the instinct of everybody would be cut taxes, make an increase. If we're talking about a specific portion of the budget, I think it could work. And the reason that I think it could work is because I see it working with the parents' associations. I'm not confident that you know how it works in Cyprus, but very briefly, you have every single parent have the right to actually participate in the process. You will have a 10 or 11 member council that will be doing like the practical stuff. But the decision making on how to deal with the budget, like what the priorities will be, and having the discussion about how they can make sure that the budget remains balanced, the school budget, it will remain there. And also there is income coming from the government, because it's not the local government yet, it's like from the central government. And there's also the income that comes from the parents themselves. So I think that that's a very good example if you really wanted to look into how it could work.
Why are parents paying money?
Parents are asked to pay a specific amount of money at the beginning of the year as a contribution. So there is a budget that comes from the parents.
And that's
you
for
have
public school?
for public school, yes. I'm assuming that something similar happens with private schools, maybe even more there, because they're actually paying a lot more money into the whole thing. So it could work for specific aspects, but I don't think that it's a good idea to have every single aspect of a public budget to be in the hands of people that are not going to have the time to actually sit down and monitor the thing. It takes 6 to 9 months to end up with a government budget, and it takes 2 months for the parliament to go through it, and it's again separated in committees to end up with the final budget that is going to be paid for. So a combination of the two would actually, I think, increase democratic processes. And if you want to continue this, I really suggest the Parents Association. Thank you.
Just to be very clear, our participatory budget in Europe never takes up more than 5%.
It's always a tiny fraction of it.
Yeah, 5%.
Okay, I thought it was a very interesting presentation. I liked what some of the things you said I did not know. I would like to say that I represent here the platform of gender budgeting in Cyprus. Here we created this platform a year ago, and we now have 5 universities and more than 450 organizations participating in this platform, and we try to change and we push for the reform of the budget of the government. There is a kind of commitment from the government, but they say we'll do it in the future, so we're just pushing forward so that this thing will start immediately. In order to make the government initiate this, we prepared pilot programs. So we found some people with open mind and to allow us to get into their sectors and do pilot programs. Now, the reason that I just wanted to see how we can combine what you have, the outcome of your research with these pilot programs that we want to implement in Cyprus. One of the programs will be done with the auditor's office. He gave us the permission to get into his office and do a pilot program there. And the other one we're going to do with the health organization. So I just want to see how if we can use some of this information that you have in our project, and see how we can combine these two, participatory budget with gender budgeting, which in relation in the final analysis, it's for me it's almost similar, because we are talking about the same thing. We don't look at this thing only from the point of view of gender. We are talking about a more effective budget, a more transparent budget, a more, more just a more just budget, which goes, the resources of the country go to, in a more just way, to everybody. So I think there are very many similarities with what you're talking about. So we would like to know more about what you're doing, to see how we can combine these things and come and reach a better solution for the budget. Thank you.
Is there anybody else?
Hi, and thank you for an interesting presentation. Personally, I wasn't familiar with the concept, but thinking more and more about it after your discussion, it reminded me a little bit of the Swiss model. So where I think it could work, or it could have an effect. There's a lot of votes and websites on the British in Switzerland, and it's increasingly a participatory democracy compared to the EU member states. So that kind of model and that kind of opportunity in a country that doesn't necessarily have a more informed or educated populace, it still brings, I think, a positive effect. And I mean, in contrast to what you're saying about having a very small percentage of the budget given to this method, I would think the higher that percentage is, the more transparency and accountability it can offer. So where citizens of countries like Cyprus might think a big part of the EU budget for those countries goes to infrastructure projects, goes to things that aren't necessarily seen by the citizens in their day-to-day, taking part in that kind of a vote can really have a positive effect in that area.
Thank you for your input. Shall we? We are running out of time. Unfortunately, we could talk for hours. Does anybody want to make a closing statement?
Well, I'd like to answer some of these fascinating inputs. So the schools one is fascinating because that really comes out. I've been reading thousands of tweets and newspaper articles, and it's quite vibrant in schools. So schools is certainly in the US, I think in the UK as well. So the schools offers a model, and fascinatingly, they talk about PB in schools, and they allow the children, that's the other side of the thing, the children after a certain age, to specify some of the priorities they'd like to spend money on. The gender one, again, fascinating, because some of the calls for greater PB is precisely to bring socially excluded groups. Now, it's not women everywhere, but certainly in Cyprus, there's a low proportion of your political class that is made up for women. Even just having 50-50, and you can configure a PB to make sure it's got 50-50 male-female participation, so that in a way thing. And Switzerland, I can't help about Switzerland as I'm there. So you don't really need PB in Switzerland because they've got direct democracy. So they vote on the big thing. Yeah, you're going to build a bridge, a huge investment, say 4 or 5 million euros. So they don't necessarily have that much PB, but what they've got is vibrant direct democracy. So you can't do something in a municipality in Switzerland really without the people approving it. Big major investments will go through the people, but it is quite a unique system. So thank you for your questions, and that was a short one for me.
Can I? Just two very short remarks. It's true that it's only a fraction of the budget, so then it's not necessarily a problem. But what I see from my experience in my city is that most projects that are being submitted are about bike paths and playgrounds, which obviously are important, but it's difficult to imagine what happens when people would come up with divisive issues. You know, if I don't know, a couple of young people say, we want the LGBTQ club to be in this venue. and then people start voting, then obviously you don't end up with the most equitable result. The other issue is that a lot of the PB process needs or can be geared around deliberation. So you get people to actually talk with each other. Then, of course, then you run into the problem of some people don't feel empowered enough to talk. They you know, whatever they have to say is not taken into account. You always have this sort of natural leaders. But I think this is where the value, and then your example with the schools is great, because this creates a setting where everybody has an interest, then you start talking, and then this deliberation may take or may not take off. But yeah, that's a good thing.
Okay, I'll just conclude with some takeaway ideas. Yes, please.
Yeah, well, first of all, trust me, we'll be extremely happy to talk to you about more specifically, okay, how can we use this? At the end of the day, we actually want something real to come out of this other than research papers and, you know, me making graphs and having fun with statistics. So please, just let's exchange information and talk. I don't know how useful we would be, but we can probably help out, say, with the mechanics of the process, or, you know, what the decision-making mechanism is, or even the technical aspects. If you, we can discuss this. But I did want to add something that my personal misgiving about this whole process. While what you are doing is genuinely oriented toward justice and, you know, what we normatively consider positive things, participatory budgeting is so flexible a policy that it can accommodate more nefarious purposes, meaning a local authority can make use of this policy to legitimize decisions that it would otherwise not be able to do it. There is a city in Germany where participatory budgeting means here are 10 departments that the city has. Which do you want to cut? Yeah, to cut first. How much do you want to cut this by? Which means less money for public services, but a decision made by you personally. That's a way to legitimize decision. This is not something to be left to people. It creates a bad environment for communication among citizens. It's not just that it's a bad idea in general. So participatory budgeting can be used one way or the other, and it all depends on what the municipal authority, because this is almost always done at the local level, what the municipal authority wants to achieve through it. So that's...
Yeah. Of course, and we are concluding now, it can also cope with problems like political corruption, low turnout in elections, transparency is more increased, of course, and some ideas would be, I would like to see some PB projects in sustainability. Green sustainability in Cyprus will be interesting, gender balance, and we can start from the schools and universities, because it's in education we have to invest, of course, to set up this mentality. Thank you all for being here. Unfortunately, I have to conclude. Thank you very much.